Hello, Delvers. Welcome back to the Vaults Remastered yet again. Today, we're going to continue with our conversation, our deep dive discussion about the Ignaruk, a brand new homebrewed ancestry I'm putting together for my Pathfinder 2nd Edition remastered game known as the Vaults of the Underearth. Today, we're going to get into the more mechanical side of things, the stat block for this ancestry. Because last video, we started with going through this template process. We introduced the concept of our Ignaruk, this ancestry for my Pathfinder game. We went through a series of 9 steps where we started with basic scratch design goals and some inspirational sources that I found from 3rd edition D&D, known as the orog. And we built a complete ancestry template, stepping through the lore, the perceptions, the description, the society, the belief structure, the naming conventions, and rationales for why one of these creatures, one of these volcanic brimstone orcs, would wish to become an adventurer in the first place. Today, we're going to continue with this. We're going to get into the second part of the conversation where we're looking at the mechanics, stats, abilities, things that tie into this lore, this ancestry that we just came up with. That we have the mechanical side of things, the number side of things, the dice rolling stuff that your players are going to want to know, of course, during fights, encounters, that sort of stuff. So let's go ahead and start with the basics. Source material that I am using for this concept. I mentioned it last session. I'm gonna expand upon that, of course, and that is a 3rd edition tome known as the Races of Faerûn. There's a big old section in this book, which was, like it says, it's all about different races. So not just your typical dwarf and human and halfling, that sort of thing. They had all kinds of other weird races. So they had a big old section, about 10 pages, 65 through 74, talking about half orcs and lots of different sub races. And there was a section in there about the orog, this deep orc, that was interesting to me. And that was on pages 71 through 73. And in that section, they got into all the stuff that I was just mentioning, the lore, society, belief systems, history stuff, etc., etc. And that is really the sort of the format that my template follows, which also was mimicking what the Pathfinder game system uses as well in 2nd edition and going back to 1st edition, because Pathfinder got its birth from 3rd edition, technically 3.5 D&D. But anyway, in this book, The Races of Faerûn, there was a section about the orog, and as you can see here on the screen, there is a whole bunch of stat stuff, right? Abilities, numbers, movement speeds, etc. So there was a lot of base information here that I could draw from, aside from the basic standard stuff you'd find out about orcs or half orcs from the 5th edition rulebooks. But that wasn't the only resource I was using for this. And I did mention this in the opening video, part 1. But there was another race that was in this book that was talking about orcs being mixed with fiendish blood, demons or abyssal blood. Same Races of Faerûn. They had another section later in the book about plain touched races. So things like modern day, Genasi, Tieflings, Azamar, stuff like that. But they also had these Tonaruk, which were orcs that had been mixed or bred with demonic blood. And that appeared on pages 123 through 125. Another huge section talking about all the stats and all the numbers and all the basic mechanical stuff you would need to roll up a Tonaruk player character. And so I used a lot of this information as well, because this is the part where it brought in the idea of orcs mixed with fiends. So my initial concept for my Ignaruk was this deep, these darklands, underdark, subterranean orcs. And then I saw this information about the Tonaruk, these plain touch, these fiendish orcs, and that helped spur the idea of, these orcs had fallen, not just settled into, the Darklands, the Underdark, or my game world known as the Vaults of the Underearth. They didn't just land in the Underdark part here and, become dark vision or whatever. They fell deep down into the pits of hell itself. So my initial concept of these orcs that had gotten below the surface, which was tied into my initial, game world of which was actually an old 5e game I was had on the surface of my game world known as Erekor. And there was a bunch of orcs that were inhabitants of the Volclands. They were your prototypical evil, monster subrace. But as I moved my game into an Underdark version, and ultimately into this Vaults Pathfinder game version that I'm running, I had to have some explanation, some sort of idea of where and why and how they were down there. So you got the original idea of the Orog being these subterranean, darklands, underdark orcs, and then throw in this concept of the Tonaruk, the blending of orcs with fiendish blood, and that really was two major influences for me in my Ignaruk itself. So a lot of the information that I started with came from this Races of Faerûn, these two races, and I blended them into my own game world and used that to really get my fuel for my creativity on the Ignaruk. So let's keep going here. So then what we're faced with is I took that information and adapted it to create a living, playable Orog race, which went into my game world known as the Vaults, as I said. And this was my original 5th edition version of the Orog. So it wasn't any deviation from, the basic idea of what you'd see in the 3rd edition or the 3rd edition D&D games, or what advanced later through, 4th edition, 5th edition, and into the Monster Manual. I just took the stuff from those editions and created this 5th edition compatible playable race known as the Orog. And I ran this game for about 3 years, mostly with family and some friends. But then when the Pathfinder 2nd Edition's remaster rules came out, and I was looking for something new, kind of like maybe like a lot of you all out there might have gotten a little bit frustrated or bored with 5th Edition, D&D, OGL stuff, blah, blah, yada, 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 you decided to take a look at Pathfinder. So I had this as my starting point with the lore that I've already discussed, and now I needed to migrate it over to Pathfinder, and that, of course, is where this whole video series started for me several months ago back in October. So I have this as my starting point, and when I started the Pathfinder game, I had to evolve it to fit the rule system, of course. And recently, what's come out in the remaster, which was just a few months back with the player core, they released the orc. So previously, Pathfinder had the half orc, like you would expect any sort of D&D based derivative. But the remaster with the orc license and everything else that came out, they got away from sort of the concept of half breeds, half races, that sort of stuff, and they just embrace the orc itself. So on page 70 and 71 of the player core, there is the orc. So I have this as sort of a starting point for me to take that 5e D&D version of the Orog, which I was just talking about here, and use the half orc and now the orc with the remastered version, and have a template to start to compare to or build off of. So these are the basic stats that you would find in Pathfinder 4 and Orc. Now, just as an FYI, if you haven't played Pathfinder before, all of the ancestries, which is what the races are called, they have starting hit points. You can kind of consider this like almost like a level 0 hit point. So orcs in Pathfinder, they start with 10 HP. Then they have a size medium, they have a speed 25, 2 free attribute boosts, which is what they're saying here. Languages, common, orcish, additional ones if you have high intelligence, orc and humanoid traits, and they have dark vision. So that is the stock orc from Pathfinder 2nd Edition remastered player core 70 and 71. Now that is great and all, but it really doesn't fit my game world that well because I have a complete subterranean darklands, vaults of the under earth game world. And in Pathfinder, you don't just have your ancestries, you have a set of heritages, which in D&D terms would be equivalent to subraces. Well, in Pathfinder, in the player core with this new orc that just came out, there's only one heritage that fits the description of something that would be subterranean. That's the deep orc, right? Super creative name there. And that's it. So it's very limiting if you're homebrewing something in a Darklands type of environment, because any other ancestry is going to have a half a dozen choices. But if you're zooming in on a specific, sub realm of your game worlds, you're not playing the entire realm of, world of Galarian like you would in Pathfinder. You're zooming in on a small place. That's what I'm doing. I'm zoomed in on my world known as the Vaults, this subterranean, pancake stack of caverns beneath the surface of my game world. So I needed something more than just a deep orc. I need 5, 6 heritages, just like any other ancestry would have. And this is one of my big challenges for any of my conversions, any of my remasters that I'm doing. So this sets up, something else I need to worry about. So I've got my initial 5e orog stat block. I need to convert that into a Pathfinder 2nd edition stat block. And then I have to start thinking ahead, because I want to have more than just a deep orc version. I want to have multiple versions, and I'm not even sure a deep orc per se matches my concept of Ignaruk. So that is really a lot of the rationale for what I'm doing. Hey, why don't you just take the deep orc from Pathfinder? Well, I could, but it's extremely limiting. The other issue you have here, at least I have here, is that the game that I'm setting up is very survival based, very dark fantasy, high threat levels. And so just having dark vision isn't enough. So anytime I create one of my homebrew ancestries, I shoot for 3 special abilities. So dark vision is not very special in my game world, because pretty much every ancestry has some form of low light vision, dark vision, tremor sense, something, because they're living in a very dark environment. They're living below the earth. So they have to have something like this already. So dark vision really isn't going to cut it for me. I need to have something, at least that, and then more. So each of the ancestries I go through, you'll see I have at least 3 different of these little special abilities that they're going to have. So that's what you're going to start to see as I go through my process. The other thing I want to point out here is in Pathfinder, you have attribute boosts. So they've gotten rid of, in the remastered rules, the actual raw ability scores, like, oh, I've got a 16 strength and a 13 constitution, whatever. They just go straight to the bonuses, the +1, the +2, the +3, whatever. They're known as boosts. So you're able to add attribute boosts upon character creation to whatever stats you're looking at. What it's saying here is that if you're going to play an orc, you're going to get 2 free boosts. You're going to be able to add a +2 to 2 different of your stats: strength, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, whatever. Now that is sort of the variable rule that they're indicating here. The original rules in Pathfinder, which I'm using in my game, the 2nd edition rules, and I think it's still official rules if I'm not mistaken, in the remaster book. You typically would start with your ancestry choice, and you would get 3 different boosts. So you get to pick 3 different attributes and add a bonus of +2 to each of them. And then you would take a flaw penalty, a -2 on, or I think it's a -1 on one of your other. Actually, yeah, the boosts are +1s. If you were using the original ability scores, you'd add 2. So just correct that. You would only add a +1, a +2, a +3, or +4. So the attribute boosts are +1s at character creation. The flaw is a -1. So you'll see in my version, I'm going to have 3 +1 boosts and 1 -1 flaw penalty. All right, but anyway, this is, a good starting point for me. And then the other thing I'm not going to mention in this video is that I'm not going to get into the heritages yet, but there's also a set of ancestry feats that goes with your ancestry choice. So when you choose the orc, you also get to choose a feat, a power that is specific to orcs, that's unique to their ancestry. I have that planned as well. That's going to be our upcoming videos. So I'm going to do one about heritages coming up in video 3. And then I'm going to get into feats in probably the 4th video if I split this up the way I'm planning. But this is where I'm at, right? I have this as my starting point, my at least a comparison that I can look at. So whatever I'm creating should be similar to this orc out of the player core. All right, let's keep going. Then what I need to do now is remaster all this information from the D&D versions that I was using as resources from my original 5e version of the orog to the orc influence here in the Pathfinder game system and give birth to my Ignaruk's official mechanics. It's stat block. So here's what I do to make this happen. I have a template similar to what you saw with my Ancestry, and it follows these basic rules. So all of my Ancestries that I create, they have this basic baseline starting point. 6 hit points is your level 0 starting Ancestry bare minimum. You're not going to go lower than that to my knowledge. Maybe making a pixie or something like that, but 6 is bare bones minimum. 25-foot movement speed, that's the most frequent, the most common. That's the average movement speed. Some are a little bit faster, 30, and some are a little bit slower, 20. You got the 2 boosts that I was originally telling you that are a mental and a physical. You also get a free boost, which is down here at the bottom, and then there's the ability flaw, which I already told you. That would be that -1 penalty. And for me, I look for something that's thematic or stereotypical based upon the ancestry's lore and history and that stuff. So those are the bare bones minimum. From there, you then have your lore, you have your history, you have all the stuff I talked about in that last video with my Ignaruk backstory stuff. I can use that to start to figure out what sort of boosts and flaws and extra little things they should have. First stat you want to look at, or first template mechanic, is the rarity in your game world. In Pathfinder, you're as a GM, you're allowed to control obviously what your characters can choose as far as ancestries, and it's not so much a control, dominating your players, but it's if you're running a game world where a certain species is extremely rare, the player can't just pick that. They need to get your permission because as GM, you need to explain how and why certain things are in the game world, right? So if somebody says, "Oh, I want to play, a leshy, one of these plant creatures," and meanwhile your game is taking place in the Arctic where there are no plants growing, how is it there's a leshy there? So in that example, right, leshy would be extremely rare. There would have to be some special circumstance that you would have to come up with as a GM and as a player to rationalize why it's possible. So in my game world, these Ignaruk, they are rare. They're going to be, you'll see in my stat block in a couple minutes, but they're going to be rare just based upon all the background information about them. The hit points then, and this is for the ancestry, is going to range somewhere between 6 and 10 in that range there. Size small or medium. I don't think there's any stock large ones, although I think there might be something coming out in an upcoming Pathfinder release, so don't quote me on that one. But all the ones in the core rule books, the Player Core 1 and the upcoming Player Core 2, to my knowledge, are either small or medium. There's no like tiny ones or large ones. Although it's, you could certainly create one if you wanted to. Speed ranges 20 to 30, as I mentioned. Already mentioned the 2+1s and the 1 free boost for the ability boost. I already mentioned the 1 flaw, or the optional rule, which you saw, I think, with the orc ancestry out of the Pathfinder player core, was that the variant rule says that you can avoid taking a flaw, but you have to sacrifice one of your boosts. So in other words, you just pick 2 boosts and no flaw whatsoever. It's pretty much the same thing anyway, because if you don't like the flaw, then just use your freebie and get rid of the flaw. It's not a big deal. That's what it really equates to. But some people, they just can't swallow the fact that, wait, you're penalizing me upon character creation. That's not fair. Hey, life's not fair, and certainly not fair in the Underearth, okay? It's a violent, dark place. Languages depends on the ancestry, of course, right? But for my game, most everybody has Undercommon, because that's the language of the Darklands. Traits, for the most part, everything's going to have humanoid, depending again upon what it is, but you might have additional things like Fiend or Fey or Elemental or whatever, or Construct perhaps. And then the special abilities. Mention this, Dark Vision was what the Orcs had as their special ability. My game, I'm shooting for 3 different things because it's just a default. They're going to have some sort of special vision. But these are those unique features that kind of sets that ancestry apart from all other ancestries. I'm shooting for 3. got a special type of sense, low light vision, dark vision, tremor sense, maybe a special smell, blind sense or whatever, right? I've got something like that that fits my game world. All right, so those are my targets. This is my template. So I've got my starting position from the third edition D&D influences. I have my original 5e conversion of those. I have my Pathfinder second edition, the remastered version of the orc as a comparison. Now I can go ahead and actually get into the mechanics of my Ignaruk itself. So here is what I came up with for the Ignaruk, its base stats. I've got rarity, rare, given that these guys cannot procreate, they cannot reproduce. If you haven't seen my last video, this is why that might not make sense. What do you mean they don't reproduce? Go ahead and check out the first video I did about the Ignaruk the other day. Like, subscribe to the channel so you can go check out the playlists, and I have a little section going about Ignaruk and about the ancestries of my game world. But they're rare based upon the inability to procreate and the fact that they're fairly new arrivals to the game world. They crawled up out of hell only a few years ago. They emerged from the eye as they climbed up through this fire node known as the pit. They climbed up from hell. Their hit points, base hit points for their ancestry is 10. So as you create this character level 0, they have 10 hit points. In Pathfinder, you get additional hit points from your class, and every time you level up, you get more hit points. Then size medium. Okay, nothing special there. Speed 25 feet. That's pretty average. Ability boosts. I chose strength and constitution because it fits, again, the lore of this ancestry. They're survivors. So strength, endurance, these things are critical to these people. And then you get one free boost on top of that. And then a flaw is intelligence. They don't have time for book study and learning. They're all about surviving and just using their basic instincts and just sort of primal awareness for survival. Then I've got languages, Undercommon and Orc, of course, and I threw in Diabolic because they did originate from Hell. They lived for centuries down on the surface of Hell, which in game terms for me is it's another planet. It's another world that's connected to my main game world through various, tunnels and interdimensional pockets. For me, it was an elemental tunnel known as a fire node, and it's existing down here in my subterranean world, and it's called the Pit. So these guys, they also picked up some Diabolic. Then you also get additional languages of your choice based upon your intelligence modifier, and I give my players a list of languages which would be common to the game world that they can choose from. So for every point of intelligence boost you have, +1, +2, +3, +4, you can add additional languages to your list. And then last but not least, at least for this basic stats, they have the orc trait, of course, the Ignaruk, they have the humanoid, and I also have fiend in here because they have a lot of influence, a lot of evolutionary impact from their exposure to fiendish energies and just not basalt, the brimstone volcanic, magmatic world of hell itself, Avernus, the surface. So those are their three traits. In Pathfinder, those traits are important because you might have spells or magic items or weapons and that sort of thing that key off of traits or do extra damage or whatever like that, or can only be used by someone with a certain trait. So these are just the stock core stats for my Ignaruk. Then the last part of this that I got into then was those special abilities, those special qualities that the Ignaruk would have. So I've got the dark vision, which I already mentioned, but I got a little bit of clarification because everybody, well, not say everybody, pretty much each ancestry in the game world has low light vision. Okay, so they can see, and like think about low light being equivalent to like a night light in your bathroom or something like that. That's kind of like low light vision. So the game world for me is mostly low lit from bioluminescence and phosphorescence. So low light vision is pretty much the base. If you have dark vision, you can see in darkness. So these guys do have straight up dark vision, which is rarer in Pathfinder than it is in D&D by a long shot. It's more common in my subterranean game world, but even so, it's still not the standard. So they do have dark vision, but because so many ancestries have low light and dark vision, I have set in this concept of light blindness as a, baked in penalty. It's the same concept of, if you're a surface race, you can see in, bright light, no problem. But if things go suddenly dark on you, you're blind, you can't see. So I thought creatures that are inhabiting the subterranean game world of the vaults would have the same exact disability, but in the opposite direction. So they're able to see in low light or darkness, but if they suddenly get exposed to bright light, it's like, they can't see. It's light blindness. So I've built in that penalty. So whenever one of these Ignaruk is exposed to bright light, they have to make a DC 10 flat check. Flat checks in Pathfinder, you just roll a d20, and that's your target number. If you roll that number or higher, you've made it. If you roll below that number, you failed, and you suffer the consequences. In this case, if you fail, you're dazzled, but if you crit fail, like you roll a nat 1, then you are blinded on a critical failure. And you have this condition as long as you remain in the bright light. So if you move out of there, it'll fade. If your check is successful, you're immune to the light blindness condition until you spend an hour back in low light or darkness and your eyes would reacclimate to those lower illuminations. At which point, if you then got in bright light again, you'd have to make another flat check, otherwise you'd be light blinded again. So that is my dark vision rule, and a lot of my ancestries have it. So it's not just a bonus, a benefit. There is a penalty here, and there are certain creatures or ancestries out there that will use this against dark vision using competitors. Like for instance, my Ganesio, which I have a whole ancestry video session about that. There's a playlist on my channel that you can go check out. If you subscribe to the channel, you'll be able to find it real easy. And the Ganesio there, they like the light. They use light as a weapon. So they would be like an enemy perhaps that could throw light out and dazzle, these Ignaruk, that sort of thing, pretty easily. All right, that's the first special ability. And if this was just stock Pathfinder 2nd edition, that would be all that they get. But as you can kind of tell, that's sort of not very flavorful, right? I've got this Ignaruk, these volcanic, these brimstone orcs, and all I'm giving them is dark vision. Yes, there are feats and ancestry things that I give, but again, I wanted more flavor right out of the gate to distinguish these guys because right now they would be indistinguishable from a standard orc. If a regular orc came down to my game world, they would be the same as my Ignaruk at this point, right? They would both have dark vision. So this is not differentiating them from the common orc. So I've given them additional special abilities, partially because I want them to be distinguishable from surface dwellers, but at the same time, as I mentioned, the game world that I'm setting up here is dangerous. It's much more risky. So there's a couple other things that an ancestry is going to get, and it's nothing that's going to break the game. Otherwise, I've messed up. So let's take a look at the other special abilities they get. The second one is aggressive, and you will have seen this type of ability in a lot of the entries about the orog, the Tonaro, orcs in general. They have this aggressiveness as like a common trait. So I have this as a natural trait of the Ignaruk. And so on that first round after you roll for initiative, their movement actions have a plus 5 foot speed bonus. So normally they can just move 25 feet with each move action they take. Well, these guys can move up to 30 feet with each of their movement actions. I may need to clarify that so that it excludes like the step action. Because in Pathfinder you have two different types of move. You got stride, which is running, walking, moving your maximum speed, and then you've got step, which is kind of that step away or fighting withdrawal, or just allows you to break contact from like a disengage action in D&D terms. Although it only lets you move 5 feet, so you move 5 feet, boom. So I want to make sure that it's clear that if you are using a step action, I don't think the 5 feet would benefit that. So I'm gonna have to clarify that it's only to stride actions. So I'll just reword that. Your stride actions have a plus 5 foot speed bonus. That'll make this easy enough. And then the third special ability that my Ignaruk get is Forged in Hellfire. And this just makes perfect sense for this ancestry, for their background, for that lore that I put together in the previous video. They were dropped down into the pits of hell by Droog betrayal, the Droog being the gray dwarves of my game world, and they betrayed these orcs who they were allies with during a war, and dropped them into hell. You know, whatever, miles and miles and miles deep. They went through this elemental fire node onto another planet. That's how, far they fell. And while they were there, they lived there for centuries, just surviving, fighting for their lives until there was only maybe like 1,000 or so of them left that managed to crawl back out of hell. So, forged in Hellfire, they're transformed by this exposure to the toxic vapors and blistering heat of Hell's volcanic surface, which is Avernus. And during their desperate climb up through the fire known as the Pit, they survive relentless predation by infernal fiends and the constant sear of bubbling magma. So for years, they were just climbing and climbing and climbing up this, ever extending vertical shaft known as the Pit. There's lava maybe dripping or magma popping out of, pockets next to them, searing gases, burning, choking ash, and there are infernal fiend predators following them, coming out of nooks and crannies on the wall. Just day after day after day of this. And that was what transformed them into these Ignaruk. So, based upon this, they have a +1 circumstance bonus to their will saving throws against fear effects, and they have a resistance to fire damage equal to 1/2 their level, a minimum of 1. So, I'll explain that a little bit to the non Pathfinder knowledgeable out there. So, in Pathfinder, you only have 3 saving throws, not 6 different ones. You got your will, your fortitude, and your, reflex saves. So, will is like your mental powers, right? So, they they've seen real fear. They've seen true evil. So you going hoogie boogie with something like that against them, they'll laugh it off. So that's where the +1 circumstance bonus comes in. Also notice that the bonus has that tag of circumstance. There's 4 different types of bonuses and they don't stack. So in other words, if you have a circumstance bonus from multiple sources, only the highest one works. So that's why there's this tag. But if you have other bonuses, let's say an item bonus, or some sort of status bonus or whatever, those can add together. So you could add a circumstance bonus with an item bonus with some other bonuses like that and get higher and higher numbers. But this is a +1 circumstance bonus to their will saves against fear effects. Not going to break the game. It's only applying to that very small kind of niche you know effect, but it fits my game role. It fits this ancestry. It fits everything that I put together in their lore. And then the fire resistance, similarly, it's not going to make or break the game. They're only resisting half of their level in damage. So even at the cap level of 20, you'd be resisting 10 points of fire damage. Of course, the benefit here is it does apply to each separate attack. So if you got hit by a fire attack each time, it would be reduced by that amount of damage. That's what damage resistance does in Pathfinder. It reduces your incoming damage by this number. So these guys, they're going to have only 1 fire resistance at level 1, right? 1 at level 2. Then it would be 2 at level 3. I believe it rounds up. So minimum of 1. It's not breaking the game either, but it's flavorful. It adds to their myth, to their biology, right? It adds to what I've created for them already. So that is what my Ignaruk looks like mechanically for the game right now. And to summarize all this for you, here's what we've got. Rarity, the rare, commonality for these things, that emphasizes that unique, distinct nature that they have, their origins in the depths of hell, and this the fact that they can't reproduce, that sort of thing. Hit points, size, they have a pretty hefty chunk of starting hit points. That is a portrayal of their sturdiness, their formidable, nature, their endurance over these harsh conditions and that sort of thing. Speed 25 feet. They're not slow, they're not super fast, they're kind of average, just their ability to navigate terrain like anybody else that lives down here. The flaws and the boosts for the abilities, strength and constitution, I think make perfect sense given that physical strength and endurance are main features of this ancestry. The flaw in intelligence reflects they focus on primal instinct. They don't rely upon intellectual pursuits at all. Languages, this again makes sense. Undercommon and Orcish, that's what their heritage is all about. The diabolic makes sense in game terms from their circumstances, their history, right? That fits the description. Then they've got the orc and fiend traits. Again, this represents their heritage, represents that infernal exposure they had. Humanoid, of course, just applies to their basic body form. Dark vision, I already mentioned this a couple times. They've had to be adapted to the darkness. Plus, you throw in that low light blindness that gives that vulnerability to bright light. That makes sense in game terms, right? And then you've got the aggressive trait. This definitely ties into their orcishness, their brutal nature as they've risen now as the Blood of the Eye tribe and zealous followers of Volculus and their vengeful spirit to destroy the Droog and the Seekers of the Dark Well, that cult that betrayed them, centuries ago. And last but not least, the Forge and Hellfire also makes sense. It ties directly to the lore that I've established for them. It details that transformation they went through, that survival in the fiery depths of hell, the resistance to fire and fear. It reflects their resilience, their determination, their survival, all those things that my lore video already has talked about. All right, I'm going to end this one here. Hopefully this was some good information, useful for you. So if you are interested in more of this stuff, of course, you like and subscribe to the video. If you want to see the complete, version of this, stay tuned because I'm going to get into heritages next. I'm going to start talking about feats after that. I'm not sure exactly how many videos this will be, but it'll be at least 3, 4. And then ultimately, I want to put together like a complete PDF, formatted nice version of this with some of the graphics and the imagery that you're seeing in the background of these slides here, so that it all looks like one nice package. Anyway, if you're interested in that, let me know because I'll put that out there for you. In the meantime, hope you all have a good night. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.